Amid the abandonment of the streets, a girl with nothing witnesses a rich boy in danger inside his own mansion. Despite the risks, she breaks in to save him, changing the course of two lives. Fleeing together, he discovers hunger, fear, and the first hand extended with tenderness. If you were touched by this beautiful story of resilience and love, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Continuing. The rain fell relentlessly on Seattle's downtown streets, turning the city's famous skyline into a blur of gray and muted lights. 17-year-old Lily Hayes pulled her worn-out jacket tighter around her small frame, seeking shelter under the awning of a closed coffee shop. For the past 3 years, she had learned to navigate the streets of Seattle with the precision of someone who understood that survival meant knowing where to hide, where to find food, and most importantly, when to remain invisible. Tonight was one of those nights when invisibility was her greatest asset. Huddled against the brick wall, she watched as two men in dark coats stopped across the street, their voices barely audible over the sound of the rain. But Lily had developed a keen sense of hearing, a necessity when you sleep with one eye open. "Williams won't know what hit him," the taller man said, his voice carrying despite his attempt to keep it low. "His security system has a blind spot on the east wing. The kid will be alone tonight." The second man nodded, checking his watch. "Kingston says the father won't be back until morning. Board meeting in San Francisco." Lily's breath caught in her throat. She knew exactly who they were talking about. Everyone in Seattle knew the Williams name. Richard Williams, tech mogul and founder of Horizon Innovations, whose modernist mansion sat perched on the hills overlooking Lake Washington. His face was plastered across billboards and local magazines, always with the same stern expression that seemed to look through you rather than at you. But it wasn't the father they were targeting. It was the son, Ethan Williams. Lily had seen him once from a distance when the community center downtown had organized a charity event. He had stood beside his father, looking uncomfortable in his tailored suit, his eyes reflecting the same loneliness she recognized in her own reflection each time she caught a glimpse of herself in a store window. Rich kid with everything and nothing at the same time. The men moved on, disappearing around the corner. Lily stood frozen, her mind racing. She should walk away. This wasn't her problem. Street kids like her knew better than to get involved in the affairs of Seattle's elite. But something about the way they had spoken about Ethan, like he was just a pawn in whatever game they were playing, made her blood run cold. Before she could talk herself out of it, Lily was moving, her feet splashing through puddles as she made her way toward the bus stop. She knew the route to the wealthy neighborhood where the Williams mansion stood, not because she had ever been invited there, but because she had memorized the city's bus lines out of necessity. As the bus climbed the steep hills of Seattle, Lily stared out at the passing neighborhoods, watching as modest apartments gave way to increasingly grand homes, each with manicured lawns and security gates. Her reflection in the window stared back at her, dark hair hanging in damp strands around a face too thin for her age, eyes that had seen too much. "What are you doing, Lily?" she whispered to herself. She had no plan, no way to explain herself if she was caught. Yet something pushed her forward, a strange certainty that if she didn't act, something terrible would happen to a boy who, despite his wealth, seemed as alone in the world as she was. The bus dropped her off 2 blocks from the Williams estate. From there, she moved silently through the shadows of towering cedar trees, her steps sure despite the unfamiliar territory. Years of navigating dangerous situations had taught her how to move undetected. The Williams mansion rose before her like something from another world, all glass, steel, and stone, its modern lines cutting an imposing figure against the night sky. Lights glowed from within, casting rectangles of warmth onto the wet lawn. Security cameras swiveled at the gates, but Lily had already spotted what the men had mentioned, a section of the eastern wall where the coverage seemed to falter. Taking a deep breath, she scaled the stone wall, her fingers finding purchase in the gaps between the rocks. The rain made the climb treacherous, but Lily had climbed worse things in worse weather just to find a safe place to sleep. Within minutes, she was over the wall and crouching in the shadow of an ornamental hedge. Inside the mansion, Ethan Williams sat alone in his bedroom, surrounded by every luxury a 17-year-old could want: a state-of-the-art computer setup, a wall of books, a television larger than some apartments Lily had stayed in. Yet his eyes were fixed on the rain streaking down his floor-to-ceiling windows, his expression vacant. His father had left that morning with barely a goodbye, just the usual reminder about homework, about staying inside, about not disturbing the staff unless absolutely necessary. Another night alone in a house too big, too quiet, too empty. Ethan scrolled through his phone, pausing on his father's social media page. Richard Williams smiled back at him from a photo taken at a tech conference, arm around the shoulders of a business partner, looking more engaged and alive than Ethan had seen him in years. The caption read, "Changing the world one innovation at a time." Horizon leads. "Changing the world," Ethan muttered, tossing his phone aside. "Can't even change what's happening in your own house." He stood up, restless, and moved to his window. The security lights illuminated the perfectly landscaped grounds, the rain creating a silver curtain that separated him from the rest of the world. Sometimes he wondered what it would be like to walk away from all of this. The pressure, the expectations, the crushing loneliness of a life lived in the shadow of Richard Williams's success. A movement caught his eye, something darting between the trees near the east wall. Ethan squinted, pressing closer to the glass. For a moment, he thought he saw a figure small and quick, but it vanished so quickly he wondered if he had imagined it. His heart rate accelerated slightly. His father's warnings about security threats had always seemed paranoid, the rambling of a man with too many secrets and too much to lose. But now, alone in the house with only the night staff, who stayed primarily in the kitchen and security quarters, Ethan felt a flicker of unease. He reached for his phone, hesitating. Who would he call? His father was in San Francisco, unreachable during his important meeting. The security team? They would think he was being paranoid, seeing shadows where there were none. The decision was made for him when he heard it, a soft tap against his window, like a branch being blown by the wind. Except there were no trees close enough to his window to touch the glass. Ethan turned slowly. There, clinging to the narrow ledge outside his second-story window, was a girl. Her dark hair was plastered to her face by the rain, her eyes wide and urgent. She tapped again, more insistently this time, and mouthed something he couldn't understand. For a moment they stared at each other through the glass, the wealthy boy in his designer clothes and the soaking wet girl who seemed to have appeared out of nowhere. Two teenagers from worlds so different, they might as well have been separate planets. Then, against every instinct and rule he had ever been taught, Ethan moved to unlock his window. The girl tumbled inside as soon as he opened it, bringing with her the smell of rain and the city streets. She straightened up, breathing hard, her eyes darting around the room as if assessing escape routes. "You need to get out of here," she said without preamble, her voice low and intense. "There are men coming for you tonight." Ethan took a step back, confusion and alarm warring on his face. "Who are you? How did you—" "There's no time," Lily interrupted, moving to the bedroom door and pressing her ear against it. "My name is Lily. I heard them talking downtown. They're coming here to your house. They mentioned a blind spot in the security system and that your father wouldn't be home." "That doesn't make sense," Ethan said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Why would anyone—" A sound from downstairs cut him off, the distinct noise of breaking glass, followed by a muffled thud. Lily's eyes met his, and in that moment, a silent understanding passed between them. This wasn't a prank or a mistake. The threat was real, and it was already inside the house. "Do you trust me?" Lily asked, extending her hand. Ethan looked at her outstretched fingers, calloused and dirty compared to his own. Everything he had been taught warned him against trusting strangers, especially ones who appeared uninvited at his window. But something in her eyes, a fierce determination and unexpected concern, made him nod. "We need to go," she whispered. "Now." Lily moved with the fluid confidence of someone accustomed to escaping dangerous situations. She guided Ethan back toward the window, her mind already mapping their exit route. "We can't go out that way," Ethan protested, looking at the steep drop to the ground below. "It's too high." "There's a trellis on the side of your house," Lily replied, already swinging her legs over the windowsill. "I saw it on my way up. Trust me, I've climbed worse." Ethan hesitated, looking around his room, at the life he'd always known, safe and predictable despite its emptiness. The sound of heavy footsteps on the stairs made the decision for him. He grabbed his phone and jacket, then followed Lily out onto the narrow ledge. The rain had intensified, making the descent treacherous. Lily moved with practiced ease, finding footholds in the decorative stonework and guiding Ethan's hands to secure grips. His expensive sneakers slipped on the wet surface, and for a heart-stopping moment, he felt himself losing balance. Lily's hand shot out, steadying him with surprising strength. "I've got you," she said simply, her eyes meeting his. "Just follow my lead." They made it to the ground, just as lights began to flick on throughout the house. Crouching in the shadows of the garden, they watched as figures moved behind the windows, searching. "Who are those guys?" Ethan whispered, his heart hammering against his ribs. "What do they want with me?" "Questions later," Lily hissed, tugging him toward the perimeter wall. "We need to get as far away from here as possible." They slipped through the garden, using the ornamental shrubs as cover, until they reached the same section of wall Lily had scaled earlier. Getting over was harder than getting in. Ethan struggled to find handholds, his manicured nails breaking against the rough stone. Lily provided a boost, her small frame surprisingly strong as she helped push him upward. Once on the other side, they ran through the quiet residential streets, the mansions of Seattle's elite watching them silently as they passed. Ethan had never been outside his neighborhood without a driver, without a plan, without his father's knowledge. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat, every sound a pursuer. "Where are we going?" he gasped, as Lily pulled him down a steep hill, leading away from the wealthy enclave. "Somewhere they won't think to look for you," she replied, her breath coming in controlled bursts despite their pace. Downtown, the Seattle skyline glittered in the distance, the Space Needle illuminated against the night sky. To Ethan, it had always been a view from his bedroom window, beautiful but distant. Now he was heading straight into its heart. They caught a late-night bus, huddling in the back as it wound its way down toward the city center. Ethan was acutely aware of how they must look, his expensive clothes a stark contrast to Lily's worn attire, both of them soaking wet and breathing hard. The few other passengers kept their distance, avoiding eye contact in that particularly urban way. "You still haven't told me who those men were," Ethan said quietly, as the city grew closer, buildings rising around them. Lily leaned back against the seat, her adrenaline fading enough to reveal the exhaustion beneath. "I don't know exactly. I was under the awning of Rainy Day Cafe when I overheard them. They mentioned your last name, the security blind spot, and that your father would be away. Said something about making a point." Ethan stared out the window, his mind racing. "My father has enemies. Comes with being successful in the tech world," he says. "But breaking into our house, threatening me, that's crazy." "Welcome to the real world," Lily murmured, "where people do crazy things when they're desperate." The bus came to a stop in Pioneer Square, the historic heart of Seattle. As they stepped off, the contrast between the manicured suburbs they'd left behind and the urban landscape before them hit Ethan like a physical force. The elegant old buildings housed a mix of upscale restaurants and shops alongside pockets of urban decay. People hurried past despite the late hour, workers heading home, tourists searching for nightlife, and the ever-present population of Seattle's homeless, huddled in doorways against the rain. Lily led him through alleys and side streets with the confidence of someone navigating their own home. Ethan followed, trying to ignore the gnawing fear in his stomach and the growing awareness that he was completely out of his depth. "So, you live on the streets?" he asked, immediately regretting how judgmental it sounded. If Lily was offended, she didn't show it. "Sometimes, when I have to, I bounce between shelters, friends' couches, and a few hidden spots I've found. Been on my own for 3 years now. What about your parents?" The question slipped out before Ethan could stop it. Lily's pace quickened slightly. "Not everyone gets to grow up in a mansion, rich boy. Some of us get dealt different cards." They turned down a narrow alley between 2 brick buildings. At the end, a metal door was propped open slightly, a sliver of warm light spilling onto the wet pavement. Lily approached it with visible relief. "Grace should be here tonight," she said, more to herself than to Ethan. "She'll know what to do." The door opened into a surprisingly large space. What had once been a warehouse had been converted into a community center of sorts. Mismatched furniture created comfortable seating areas, while partitioned sections offered privacy for sleeping. A kitchen area bustled with activity despite the late hour, volunteers preparing what looked like breakfast for the following morning. The space hummed with quiet conversation and movement, a stark contrast to the silent emptiness of Ethan's mansion. People of all ages occupied the space, some reading, others talking in small groups, a few already asleep on cots in the corner. Several pairs of eyes turned to look at them as they entered. Ethan fought the urge to shrink back, acutely aware of his designer clothes and the Apple Watch, still strapped to his wrist. A woman in her early 40s approached them, her face lighting up at the sight of Lily. before shifting to curious concern when she noticed Ethan. She had the kind of face that seemed permanently set in the expression of gentle determination, with laugh lines around her eyes and silver streaking her dark hair. "Lily," she said warmly, pulling the girl into a quick hug before holding her at arm's length. "You're soaked through. And who's your friend?" "This is Ethan," Lily said, some of her usual guardedness falling away in the woman's presence. He needed help. Grace, can we talk privately?" Grace's eyes moved between them, a flash of recognition crossing her face as she looked more closely at Ethan. If she recognized him as Richard Williams' son, she didn't comment on it. "Of course. Let's get you both some dry clothes first." 20 minutes later, Ethan sat awkwardly on a threadbare couch in a back office, wearing donated sweatpants and a faded Seattle Seahawks hoodie that was at least a size too big. His wet clothes hung drying on a makeshift rack, his expensive sneakers stuffed with newspaper to help them dry. Lily had changed as well, into clothes that seemed familiar to her, suggesting she'd stayed here often enough to have belongings on site. She sat cross-legged on a chair across from him, while Grace leaned against an old desk, her expression thoughtful as Lily finished explaining the situation. "So you have no idea who these men were or what they wanted?" Grace asked, looking at Ethan. He shook his head, feeling strangely ashamed. "My father, he doesn't exactly share the details of his business with me. I know there have been some problems at the company lately. I overheard him arguing on the phone about layoffs and some kind of internal investigation. But that's it." Grace and Lily exchanged a look that Ethan couldn't quite interpret. "Horizon Innovations has been in the news," Grace said carefully. "There were allegations about unfair labor practices, whistleblowers being silenced. Your father denied everything, of course." "I didn't know," Ethan said, the words hollow even to his own ears. How much of his father's world remained hidden from him? How could he live under the same roof as a man and know so little about what he did, who he really was? "You should call him," Grace suggested gently. "Whatever's happening, he needs to know you're safe." Ethan pulled out his phone, staring at the screen. 3 missed calls from the house security team. None from his father. The familiar ache of disappointment spread through his chest. "He's in San Francisco until tomorrow, important board meeting," Ethan said, unable to keep the bitterness from his voice. Security will have contacted him by now, but he trailed off, not needing to complete the thought. If his father had called, it would have been the first time he'd put Ethan before business. Grace's expression softened. "You can stay here tonight. We have extra cots and it's safe. Tomorrow we can figure out next steps." "I can't just hide out here," Ethan protested. "My father has resources, security teams, connections with the police. He'll find a way to handle this." "And if those men are connected to something your father did?" Lily asked bluntly. "What then?" The question hung in the air between them. Ethan had no answer. "One night," Grace said firmly. "Stay tonight, get some rest, and in the morning we'll help you contact your father safely. Lily will show you where you can sleep." As Grace left the room, Ethan turned to Lily, questions bubbling up inside him. "Why did you help me? You risked your life climbing up to my window. You don't even know me." Lily was quiet for a long moment, her eyes fixed on some middle distance. "I know what it's like to be alone when danger comes," she finally said. "No one deserves that." She stood up, gesturing for him to follow. "Come on, rich boy. Let's find you a bed that isn't made of Egyptian cotton." Despite everything, Ethan found himself smiling slightly at her teasing tone. As they walked back into the main area of the shelter, the strangeness of his situation hit him anew. In less than 2 hours, he had gone from the isolated luxury of his bedroom to this bustling communal space filled with people who had nothing yet seemed to share everything. And somehow, for the first time in years, the constant loneliness that had been his shadow seemed to lift just slightly. Here, in this unlikely place with this fierce, mysterious girl as his guide, Ethan Williams found himself truly seen. Richard Williams' private jet touched down at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport at 3:47 a.m., nearly 6 hours before his scheduled return. His knuckles were white as he gripped the armrest during landing, his normally composed face drawn with tension. The moment the plane's wheels hit the tarmac, he was already unbuckling his seatbelt, ignoring the flight attendant's polite reminder to remain seated until they reached the gate. "I'll have a car waiting for you, Mr. Williams," his assistant said, typing rapidly on her tablet. She had been with Richard for 8 years and had never seen him like this. The careful control that defined his public persona stripped away, revealing the raw concern underneath. "Cancel my meetings for the next 3 days," Richard instructed, gathering his briefcase with uncharacteristic haste. "And get me Detective Cooper on the phone. Tell her I want her at the house by the time I arrive." The drive from the airport to his Lake Washington mansion was a blur of rain-slicked streets and anxious silence. Richard stared out the window, his mind replaying the security chief's call that had interrupted his dinner with potential investors in San Francisco. "There's been a breach at the residence, sir. Ethan is missing." Those words had stopped his world. Richard Williams had built his tech empire from nothing, had weathered corporate espionage, market crashes and public scandals, but nothing had prepared him for the icy fear that gripped him when he realized his son was gone. As the car pulled through the gates of his estate, Richard took in the scene with a businessman's eye for detail. Police vehicles parked discreetly to avoid attracting media attention, security personnel scanning the perimeter. Everything looked normal on the surface, but Richard knew better. The careful world he had constructed was fracturing. Detective Sarah Cooper was waiting for him in his study, a space Ethan had once called the room where Dad becomes Mr. Williams. At 45, Cooper had the confident posture of someone who had earned her position through merit rather than connections. Her salt-and-pepper hair was cut in a practical bob, and her eyes held the patient intelligence that had made her Richard's go-to investigator for sensitive matters over the years. "Tell me everything," Richard said, forgoing any greeting as he closed the door behind him. Cooper nodded, professional and direct. "At approximately 11:15 p.m., your security system detected a breach on the east side of the property. 2 minutes later, the glass door in the rear sunroom was broken. Security footage shows 2 men entering the house. By the time your security team responded, the intruders had fled." She paused, consulting her notes. "Your son's bedroom window was found open. No signs of struggle, but Ethan was gone." "Kidnapping?" Richard asked, the word feeling like ash in his mouth. "Unclear, no ransom demands so far, but there's something else." Cooper pulled out her tablet and showed him a security image. "This was captured by your eastern perimeter camera 10 minutes before the breach. Someone scaled your wall at a blind spot in the coverage, a teenage girl by the looks of it. She made it to Ethan's window." Richard stared at the grainy image, confusion mixing with his fear. "A girl, what does she have to do with this?" "That's what's interesting," Cooper said, swiping to another image. "Footage from a traffic camera 6 blocks away shows 2 teenagers running from the direction of your house, right around the time of the breach. One matches Ethan's description, the other appears to be the same girl." Richard sank into his chair, trying to process this information. "You're saying this girl, what? Helped Ethan escape? From what?" "That's my working theory. The timing suggests she arrived before the intruders. Perhaps she warned him." Cooper's expression remained neutral, professional. "Do you know of any threats against your family, Mr. Williams? Anyone who might want to harm your son?" The question hung in the air between them. Richard's mind flashed to the stack of legal documents on his desk at Horizon headquarters. The NDA violations, the employee complaints that had been quietly settled, the recent board inquiries into certain irregularities in how whistleblowers had been handled. "I run a multi-billion-dollar tech company, Detective. We make enemies every time we innovate faster than our competitors." He straightened his tie, retreating behind the corporate mask that had served him so well. "But no specific threats, no." Cooper's eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't press. "We're running facial recognition on the girl, checking shelter databases and school records. With your permission, I'd like to access Ethan's social media accounts, see if there's any connection there." "Of course, whatever you need." Richard stood and walked to the window, looking out at the manicured grounds that suddenly seemed like a poor imitation of security. "Just find my son, Detective." As Cooper left to coordinate with the police team, Richard remained at the window, his reflection staring back at him from the glass. Successful, powerful, and completely alone. When had Ethan become a stranger living in his house? When had the distance between them grown so vast that he couldn't even guess who might have helped his son flee in the night? For the first time in years, Richard Williams felt the weight of everything he had sacrificed in his climb to the top, including, perhaps, the one thing that mattered most. Morning light filtered through the high windows of the community center, casting long rectangles across the floor where Ethan lay on a narrow cot. He woke disoriented, the unfamiliar sounds of many people sharing a space washing over him, quiet conversations, the clatter of dishes from the kitchen area, footsteps moving with purpose across concrete floors. For a moment, panic gripped him as the previous night's events came rushing back. Then he spotted Lily sitting cross-legged on the floor nearby, sorting through a box of donated clothing with methodical efficiency. "You snore," she said without looking up, a hint of amusement in her voice. "Like, really loud. Rich people snoring sounds the same as everyone else, I guess." Ethan sat up, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "What time is it?" "Almost 9. Grace made breakfast earlier. I saved you some." She nodded toward a plate covered with a paper towel on a small table near his cot. Ethan's stomach growled in response. He couldn't remember the last time someone had thought to save food for him. At home, meals appeared and disappeared according to schedule, regardless of whether he was hungry or even present. As he ate the simple breakfast of scrambled eggs and toast, Ethan watched the activity around the center. Despite the early hour, the space hummed with purpose. A young woman taught math to a small group of children in one corner. 2 elderly men played chess near the kitchen. A teenager not much older than Ethan helped a younger boy mend a torn jacket. "What is this place exactly?" Ethan asked between bites. Lily looked up from her sorting. "Officially, it's the Pioneer Square Community Outreach Center. Unofficially, it's whatever people need it to be. Shelter, kitchen, classroom, family." She shrugged, as if the concept of such a flexible community was obvious. Grace started it 5 years ago when the city cut funding for the official shelter. "It's not much, but it's better than nothing. And people just help each other here, without getting anything in return?" Lily gave him a look that made him feel naive. "That's generally how community works, rich boy." Before Ethan could respond, Grace appeared, her expression serious as she beckoned them to follow her back to the office. Once inside, she turned on a small television mounted on the wall. "You need to see this," she said, tuning to a local news channel. On screen, Richard Williams stood on the steps of the family mansion, the morning light catching on his silver hair as he addressed a small crowd of reporters. He looked immaculate as always in a tailored suit, but Ethan could see the strain around his eyes, the slight tightness in his jaw that betrayed his tension. "Last night, there was an incident at our home," Richard was saying, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "My son Ethan is currently missing. We have reason to believe he may be in danger." A photo of Ethan appeared on screen, his school portrait from the previous year, looking uncomfortably formal in a blazer and tie. "I am offering a substantial reward for any information leading to Ethan's safe return," Richard continued. "If you're watching this, son, please come home. Whatever's happening, we can face it together." Ethan stared at the screen, an unfamiliar emotion catching in his throat. His father looked worried, genuinely worried. When was the last time Richard Williams had shown such concern for anything outside of quarterly reports and stock prices? "They're making it sound like you were kidnapped," Lily observed, her eyes narrowed at the screen. "Or ran away," Grace added. "Either way, your face is about to be all over Seattle, Ethan. You need to call your father." Ethan pulled out his phone, surprised to find it still had battery. 27 missed calls, 15 text messages, most from the house security team, but the 5 most recent calls were from his father directly. His thumb hovered over the callback button, but something stopped him. The men who had broken into his house, what did they want? Why had they targeted him? And why did Lily seem so convinced it had something to do with his father's business? "I need to know what's going on first," Ethan said, looking up at Grace. "Those men broke into our house for a reason. What if it's connected to those allegations you mentioned about Horizon?" Grace exchanged a glance with Lily, then sighed. "There have been rumors. Former employees who tried to report ethical violations within Horizon then suddenly disappeared from the industry entirely. The local papers ran some stories last year, but they were quickly retracted. Legal pressure, most likely. My father wouldn't do anything illegal," Ethan said automatically, but even to his own ears, the defense sounded hollow. How well did he really know Richard Williams, the businessman? The man who spent more time in boardrooms than at his own dinner table. "Maybe not illegal," Grace said carefully. "But there's a lot of space between illegal and ethical, Ethan." The office door opened, and a young man with a laptop tucked under his arm entered, his expression urgent. "Grace, you need to see this. It just went live on the Horizon website." He set the laptop on the desk, turning it so they could all see the screen. A press release was displayed, the Horizon Innovations logo prominent at the top. The headline read, Horizon CEO offers $250,000 reward for information on son's whereabouts. Ethan's eyes widened as he scanned the text. The release included not only his description, but also mentioned a teenage girl approximately 16–18 years old, dark hair, slight build, who might be with him. There was even a grainy security image that, while not clear enough for positive identification, could certainly be Lily. "They've got your picture," Ethan said, turning to Lily with growing alarm. "If someone recognizes you—" "I need to get out of here," Lily said, already moving toward the door. "If those men connect me to this place, everyone here could be in danger." "Wait," Grace said firmly, placing a hand on Lily's shoulder. "No one's going anywhere yet. We need to think this through." She turned to Ethan. "Call your father, but put it on speaker. We need to hear what he has to say." Ethan nodded, his heart racing as he dialed. The call connected almost immediately. "Ethan?" His father's voice contained a note of urgency Ethan had never heard before. "Where are you? Are you safe?" "I'm safe, Dad," Ethan said, surprised by the wave of emotion that threatened to overwhelm him at the sound of his father's voice. "I'm with friends. Thank God." There was a pause, and Ethan could hear his father's controlled breathing. "I'm sending Detective Cooper to bring you home. Just tell me where you are." Ethan looked at Lily and Grace, both watching him intently. "First, I need to know what's going on. Who were those men? Why did they break into our house?" The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken truths. When Richard finally spoke, his voice had changed, harder, more careful. "This isn't a conversation to have over the phone, Ethan. Come home and I'll explain everything. Like you've explained things before?" The bitterness in Ethan's voice surprised even him. "I need the truth, Dad. For once." Another pause, longer this time. "It's complicated, son. There are situations at Horizon. Former employees with grudges. But I'm handling it." "Former employees?" Ethan pressed, catching Lily's eye as she mouthed, "Told you," silently. "Like the whistleblowers the news mentioned last year." "Who have you been talking to?" Richard's voice sharpened. "Ethan, whoever is with you may not have your best interests at heart. There are people who would use you to get to me, to damage what I've built. Is that all you care about?" Ethan felt something break inside him, the last remnant of childish faith that his father would somehow transform into the parent he needed. "Your company, your reputation?" "Of course not," Richard said, but the hesitation before he answered told Ethan everything. "You're my son. I just want you home and safe." Ethan looked at Lily, at this girl who had risked everything to warn a stranger, who had pulled him from danger without a second thought. Then at Grace, who had built this place of warmth and community from nothing but determination and care for others. "I'll come home," Ethan said finally, "but not yet. I need time to think, Dad. And I need you to call off the search for the girl in your press release. She saved me. She's not part of this." "Ethan, promise me, Dad, or I stay where I am." The silence stretched between them, father and son locked in the first real confrontation of their relationship. "All right," Richard finally said, his tone revealing how unused he was to compromise. 24 hours. "But then you come home and we deal with this as a family." As the call ended, Ethan looked up to find both Lily and Grace watching him with expressions he couldn't quite read, something between respect and concern. "Your father doesn't give up control easily, does he?" Grace observed quietly. "No," Ethan agreed, a sad smile touching his lips. "It's pretty much his defining characteristic." "So what now?" Lily asked, arms crossed defensively. "You heard him. Those men were from his company, former employees with grudges. That's corporate speak for people who got stepped on." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, the weight of the situation settling over him. "Now we find out what those grudges are really about. Before I go back home, I need to know exactly what my father is involved in." For the first time since they'd met, something like approval flickered in Lily's eyes. "Well, rich boy, looks like you might have a backbone after all." Marcus Daniels stared at his laptop screen, watching the press conference replay for the third time. Richard Williams looked appropriately concerned, his usual corporate polish slightly frayed around the edges, a father worried about his missing son. It was a convincing performance. "He's good. I'll give him that," Marcus muttered, pausing the video on Richard's face. 5 years ago, I would have believed every word." Across the small apartment, Victor Reynolds looked up from the stack of documents he was organizing. Unlike Marcus, whose anger burned hot and visible, Victor's rage was a cold, calculating thing, the product of methodical planning, and patience. "You always did think he hung the moon," Victor replied, his voice neutral despite the bitterness of his words. "That's why he picked you to lead the Nexus project. You were loyal." Marcus closed the laptop with more force than necessary. At 42, he still had the intense energy that had made him a rising star at Horizon Innovations before everything fell apart. His dark hair was now streaked with premature grey, and the lines around his eyes spoke of years spent fighting battles he never anticipated. "We both were," Marcus said, "until we saw what he was really doing." Victor nodded, returning to his meticulous sorting. 3 years as Horizon's legal compliance officer had taught him the value of documentation. The evidence they'd gathered filled 2 storage boxes, emails, memos, financial records, all pointing to the systematic suppression of safety concerns in Horizon's flagship neural interface technology. "Plans changed," Victor said, looking up at his former colleague. "The boy got away, and not alone according to the news." "Some street kid helped him," Marcus agreed, pacing the small living room. "Complications we didn't need." "Or an opportunity," Victor countered, his lawyer's mind already reframing the situation. "Williams is vulnerable now. His concern for his son might make him more receptive to our demands." Marcus stopped pacing, considering this. Their original plan had been simple: get to the Williams mansion, confront Ethan, use him as leverage to force Richard to finally acknowledge the dangerous flaws in the Nexus technology before it went to market. Not to harm the boy, just to create enough pressure to make Richard listen when all legal channels had failed. "So what now?" Marcus asked. "We can't exactly walk up to his front door with our evidence, not with police crawling all over the place." Victor closed the folder he'd been examining, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "No, but I know someone who might be able to help us get a message to Williams. Someone he trusts." Detective Sarah Cooper sipped her coffee as she studied the board she'd set up in her small office at Seattle PD. Photos, timelines, and notes covered the surface, all centered around Ethan Williams' disappearance. 20 years on the force had taught her to trust her instincts, and right now those instincts were screaming that something didn't add up. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "The boy isn't in danger from us, but he might be from his father's secrets. Check Horizon's Nexus project and the employees who resigned last year." A concerned party. Cooper stared at the message, her mind racing. The Nexus project was Horizon's highly publicized venture into neural interface technology, a potential breakthrough in treating neurological disorders, according to the press releases. But there had been rumors, quickly silenced, about safety concerns and rushed testing protocols. She added the note to her board, then pulled up the employee records for Horizon Innovations that she'd requested as part of the investigation. 2 names immediately caught her attention: Marcus Daniels, former head of engineering, and Victor Reynolds, former legal compliance officer. Both had left the company within weeks of each other the previous year, with no public explanation. Cooper reached for her phone, then hesitated. Richard Williams was paying her considerable consulting fees for this investigation, on top of her police salary, but her duty was to the truth, not to her client's preferred version of it. With a decisive movement, she dialed a number not on Richard Williams' approved contact list. Seattle Times, Jason Miller speaking. "Jason, it's Sarah Cooper. Remember that favor you owe me. I need everything you have on Horizon's Nexus project, especially anything that didn't make it to print." Back at the community center, Ethan sat with Lily and Grace in the small office, staring at Grace's laptop screen. After his call with his father, Grace had suggested they do some research of their own into Horizon Innovations and the rumors surrounding the company. "Here," Grace said, pointing to an article from the previous year. The Seattle Times ran this piece about concerns over Horizon's neural interface technology, but it was retracted within days. Luckily, nothing ever really disappears from the internet. Ethan leaned forward, reading the headline, "Former Horizon engineers raise alarm over Nexus neural interface safety." The article detailed allegations from unnamed sources that Horizon had ignored critical safety concerns in its rush to be first to market with the revolutionary technology. "My father talked about Nexus all the time," Ethan said slowly. "It was going to change the world of medicine forever, but he never mentioned any safety issues." "Of course not," Lily remarked, peering over his shoulder. "That would be bad for business." Grace continued scrolling through archived articles and forum posts, There were two main whistleblowers, according to these sources. Both left the company suddenly last year, Marcus Daniels and Victor Reynolds. Those could be the men who broke into your house, Lily suggested. Ethan shook his head, struggling to reconcile the father he knew with these allegations. But why wait a year? Why come after me? Desperation, Grace suggested gently. If they tried legal channels and were shut down, they might see you as their last leverage against your father. Ethan was about to respond when a knock at the office door interrupted them. One of the center's volunteers poked her head in, her expression anxious. Grace, there's someone here asking about Lily and a boy matching Ethan's description. Says she's a detective. The three exchanged alarmed glances. Ethan's 24 hours weren't up yet. Had his father gone back on his word? I'll handle this, Grace said, rising to her feet. You two stay here. Through the partially open door, they watched as Grace approached a woman in her mid-40s with a detective's badge clipped to her belt. Despite her casual clothes, something about her bearing screamed law enforcement. I'm Detective Sarah Cooper, they heard her say. I'm investigating Ethan Williams' disappearance. I'm afraid I can't help you, Grace replied evenly. We respect the privacy of everyone who comes through our doors. Cooper seemed to consider this, then lowered her voice. Ethan and Lily couldn't hear what she said next, but Grace's posture changed subtly, still cautious but less defensive. After a brief conversation, Grace led the detective toward the office. Lily immediately tensed, looking around the small space as if searching for an escape route. It's okay, Ethan said, surprising himself with his certainty. If my father sent her, she would have brought backup. She's here alone. The door opened and Detective Cooper stepped in, her observant eyes taking in everything with a practiced sweep. Ethan Williams, she said, not a question but a confirmation. Her gaze shifted to Lily. And you must be his guardian angel. Lily's posture remained defensive. I just did what anyone would do. Breaking into a mansion to warn a stranger about danger? Cooper raised an eyebrow. That's not exactly standard Good Samaritan behavior. Despite her words, there was no accusation in her tone, only a professional curiosity. Why are you here, Detective? Ethan asked. My father agreed to give me 24 hours. Cooper pulled out her phone, showing them the anonymous text she'd received. I'm here because something doesn't add up. Your father hired me to find you, but I'm starting to think there's more to this story than a teenage runaway and some random break-in. She turned to Grace. May I sit down? I think we all need to have a conversation about Horizon Innovations, the Nexus project, and why two former executives might be desperate enough to target the CEO's son. Richard Williams sat alone in his home office, the house unnaturally quiet around him. The police presence had diminished to a single patrol car outside the gates. Detective Cooper had called to inform him she was following leads downtown, but something in her tone had changed, a subtle shift from deferential to guardedly professional. He swiveled his chair to face the window, looking out at the immaculate grounds that had always represented his success. Now they felt like the high walls of a prison he had built himself. His phone chimed with an incoming email. The sender was unknown, but the subject line stopped his breath. Nexus Project. The truth will emerge. With a growing sense of dread, Richard opened the message. It contained only a few lines of text. We tried to warn you through proper channels. You silenced us. Now we have your son's attention, even if we couldn't speak to him directly. He's searching for the truth, Richard. What will he find? What will Detective Cooper find? Perhaps it's time for an honest conversation before Nexus ruins more than just your company. MD and VR. Richard's hand trembled slightly as he set the phone down. Marcus and Victor. He should have known they wouldn't simply disappear, not after everything they had discovered. His computer pinged with an incoming video call, the board chairman's name flashing on the screen. Richard straightened his tie automatically before accepting the call, his corporate mask sliding back into place with practiced ease. Richard, the chairman began without preamble, the board is concerned about these developments. The missing son, the rumors resurfacing about Nexus safety issues. This couldn't come at a worse time with the IPO approaching. Everything is under control, Richard replied, the lie coming easily after years of corporate diplomacy. Ethan will be home soon, and as for the Nexus concerns, they were addressed months ago. The technology is sound. Make sure it stays that way, the chairman said, his tone making it clear this was not a request. We've invested too much to have this derailed by disgruntled former employees or family complications. As the call ended, Richard sat motionless, the weight of his choices pressing down on him. For the first time in years, he opened his desk drawer and pulled out a small photo frame he had tucked away. Ethan, at 10 years old, smiling widely on a rare day when Richard had taken him sailing, before Horizon had consumed every waking hour, before Richard's ambition had built a wall between them, brick by brick. With sudden clarity, Richard realized he was at a crossroads. Continue down the path that had brought him wealth and power at the cost of everything else, or find the courage to face the truth about Nexus, about the corners he had cut, about the son he barely knew. His decision was interrupted by his phone ringing, Detective Cooper's name on the display. "I found Ethan," she said without preamble when he answered, "and I think we need to talk about Marcus Daniels and Victor Reynolds, about why they might have targeted your son." Richard closed his eyes, the carefully constructed walls of his life beginning to crumble around him. "Where is he?" "Safe," Cooper replied, her tone making it clear that safe might not mean returning home immediately, and making some interesting discoveries about Horizon's recent history. "Tell him—" Richard paused, unfamiliar emotions constricting his throat. "Tell him I'm ready to talk about everything." As he hung up, Richard turned back to his computer and began to type. Not another corporate statement or damage control plan, but the truth. About Nexus, about the risks they had concealed, about the lives that could be affected if the flawed technology went to market. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Richard Williams chose truth over expedience, humanity over profit. It felt like both surrender and liberation. In a quiet corner of the community center, Ethan sat with Lily, both processing what Detective Cooper had shared with them, the anonymous text, the emerging pattern of concerns about Nexus, the suspicious departures of key Horizon employees. "I always thought my father was just absent," Ethan said quietly. "I never considered he might be hiding something like this." Lily, who had been uncharacteristically silent since Cooper's departure, finally spoke. "Everyone has secrets, rich boy. The difference is, your father's secrets have bigger consequences than most." "Why did you really help me?" Ethan asked, suddenly turning to face her. "The truth this time." Lily looked away, her fingers fidgeting with the frayed edge of her sleeve. "My brother had epilepsy," she finally said, her voice so low Ethan had to lean closer to hear. "He was part of an early trial for neural interface technology from a different company. They promised it would help control his seizures." She swallowed hard. "It made them worse. Much worse. The company denied responsibility, claimed he was an anomaly. They settled out of court with a non-disclosure agreement my parents were too desperate to refuse. Lily, When I heard those men mention your name, the Williams Mansion, I remembered the articles about Horizon's neural technology. It wasn't just about saving some rich kid. It was about stopping history from repeating itself." The raw honesty in her voice stripped away any remaining distance between them. In that moment, they weren't a wealthy heir and a street-smart survivor from different worlds. They were just two teenagers carrying burdens too heavy for their years, finding unexpected understanding in each other. "I'm going to talk to my father," Ethan said, newfound determination in his voice. "Really talk to him. About Nexus, about what he's been hiding, about what kind of company, what kind of man he wants to be." "And if he doesn't listen?" Lily asked, the question hanging between them. Ethan met her gaze steadily. "Then I'll make him listen. Whatever it takes." As the afternoon sun slanted through the high windows of the community center, casting long shadows across the floor, Ethan realized something had fundamentally shifted inside him. The lonely boy who had existed in his father's shadow had begun to find his own voice, inspired by the fierce courage of a girl who had risked everything to do what was right, even for a stranger. The community center came alive in the evening hours. As daylight faded outside, the space inside transformed. Volunteers served a simple but hearty dinner, a local musician played guitar in one corner, and people of all ages gathered in small groups to eat, talk, and momentarily forget the hardships that had brought them there. Ethan sat at a table near the back, watching this improvised family with fascination. He had spent his life in spaces designed to impress: the Williams Mansion with its museum-quality art, his elite private school with its manicured grounds, his father's corporate headquarters with its soaring glass atrium. Yet none of those places had ever felt as genuinely welcoming as this converted warehouse with its mismatched furniture and communal spirit. "First time seeing how the other half lives?" Grace asked, sliding into the seat across from him with 2 cups of coffee. More like the first time seeing people actually living, Ethan replied, accepting the cup gratefully. Everyone here has so little, but they seem connected, Grace suggested. That's what happens when you don't have walls, physical or emotional, separating you from others. Necessity creates community. Ethan nodded, his eyes scanning the room for Lily. She had disappeared shortly after their conversation with Detective Cooper, murmuring something about needing space to think. "She's on the roof," Grace said, following his gaze. "It's her thinking spot, up the stairs, door at the end of the hallway." She smiled at Ethan's surprised expression. "She goes there when things get overwhelming. And I'd say learning that a tech mogul's son is at the center of a corporate scandal qualifies as overwhelming." "Is it okay if I go up?" Ethan asked hesitantly. Grace studied him for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "You care about her already, don't you?" The question caught Ethan off guard. Did he care about Lily, this fierce, guarded girl who had crashed into his life less than 24 hours ago? Who had risked everything to warn him, a stranger, about danger? "Yes," he said simply, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. Grace nodded, apparently satisfied with his answer. "The roof is that way, just remember. Lily's had a lot of people walk out of her life. Don't make promises you can't keep." The warning followed Ethan as he made his way through the center. The stairwell at the back of the building was utilitarian, concrete steps with metal railings, dimly lit by emergency lights. The door at the top opened onto a flat roof with a magnificent view of the Seattle skyline. Lily sat on an overturned milk crate near the edge, her knees pulled up to her chest as she gazed out at the city lights. The Space Needle glowed in the distance, while closer buildings created a canyon of illuminated windows and shadowed facades. The evening air was cool but not cold, carrying the scent of the Puget Sound mixed with the urban aroma of restaurant exhausts and damp concrete. "Grace told you where to find me," Lily said, without turning around. It wasn't a question. "Is it okay that I'm here?" Ethan asked, remaining by the door. Lily shrugged, still facing away from him. "It's a free roof." Ethan approached slowly, giving her time to object if his presence was truly unwelcome. When she didn't, he sat on another crate, a respectful distance away. "Detective Cooper called my father," he said, after a moment of silence. "Told him she found me, that I've been learning about Nexus." This got Lily's attention. She turned to face him, her expression wary in the dim light. And he said he's ready to talk, about everything." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of uncertainty he wasn't even aware he had adopted from his father. "Cooper's arranged a meeting for tomorrow morning. Neutral ground." "Do you believe him?" Lily asked, studying his face. "That he'll actually tell the truth?" Ethan considered the question seriously. His relationship with his father had always been defined by careful distance. Polite conversations about school and achievements, formal dinners when Richard's schedule permitted, gifts that demonstrated financial generosity, but little personal knowledge of his son's interests or needs. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "I've never really pushed him before. Never demanded answers about anything important." "Why not?" The simple question struck at something deep and painful. Ethan looked out at the city lights, finding it easier to speak his truth to the anonymous skyline than to Lily's direct gaze. "Because I was afraid of what would happen if I pushed too hard. That he might—" He trailed off, unable to articulate the fear that had shaped his relationship with his father for as long as he could remember. "Disappear completely," Lily finished for him, her voice softer than he had ever heard it. "Yeah, I get that." They sat in silence for a few minutes, the distant sounds of the city creating a gentle backdrop to their thoughts. "Tell me about your brother," Ethan said finally. "If you want to, I mean." Lily's posture stiffened momentarily, then relaxed. "His name was Noah. He was 4 years older than me. Smart, funny, always looking out for me. The seizures started when he was 14. She picked at a loose thread on her jeans, her eyes focused on some middle distance. My parents tried everything. Medications, specialists, diet changes, nothing really worked. Then this medical tech company approached them about a trial for a neural interface that was supposed to regulate the abnormal brain activity." Ethan listened intently, recognizing the painful effort it took for Lily to share this story. It was experimental, but they were desperate. The company promised it would change his life. A bitter smile touched her lips. They were right about that part, just not in the way they meant. "What happened?" Ethan asked gently. "The device malfunctioned, sent incorrect signals to his brain. The seizures got worse, much worse. He was hospitalized for months." Lily's voice remained steady, but her knuckles were white where she gripped the edge of the crate. The company denied any responsibility, said his case was anomalous and not representative of their technology's safety profile. My parents sued, but they were up against a corporate legal team with unlimited resources. Eventually they settled, a payout with an NDA attached. "I'm so sorry, Lily," Ethan said, the words feeling inadequate against the weight of her story. "The money ran out quickly. Medical bills, specialized care. My dad couldn't handle it. He left when I was 12. Lily's expression hardened. "Mom tried, but between working multiple jobs and caring for Noah, she broke. Started drinking, then moved on to harder stuff. Child services got involved when I was 14. Noah was placed in a specialized care facility. I ended up in the system." "And now?" Ethan asked hesitantly. "Your brother, is he?" "He's still in the facility. I visit when I can, which isn't often enough." Lily turned to look directly at Ethan, her eyes fierce in the dim light. "That's why I couldn't just walk away when I heard those men talking about you, about your father's company. I've seen what happens when these tech companies rush neural interfaces to market without proper safety testing. I couldn't let another family go through what mine did." The weight of her words settled over Ethan like a physical presence. His father's company, the source of their wealth, their privilege, their status, might be on the verge of causing the same devastation to countless other families. "I'm going to make this right," Ethan said, the promise feeling like a vow. "I don't know how yet, but I'm going to make sure Nexus doesn't hurt anyone else." Lily studied him for a long moment, as if trying to gauge his sincerity. Whatever she saw in his face must have satisfied her, because she nodded once decisively. "I believe you," she said simply. The 3 words carried more meaning than any elaborate declaration could have. Coming from someone who had learned the hard way not to trust easily, they represented a fragile bridge between their worlds. A comfortable silence fell between them as they turned to look out at the city again. The Seattle skyline glittered against the darkening sky, beautiful and remote, like the view from Ethan's bedroom window, but somehow different when shared with someone who saw it through different eyes. "Do you ever play music?" Ethan asked suddenly, remembering the battered guitar case he had noticed among Lily's few possessions at the center. A flicker of surprise crossed her face. "Sometimes. Noah taught me before everything happened. I'm not very good. Would you play something for me?" Lily hesitated, then shrugged with forced casualness. "If you want to hear amateur hour, sure." They made their way back downstairs, Lily leading Ethan to a quiet corner where her guitar case lay tucked beneath a table. The case itself told a story, covered in stickers from bands and places, scuffed from years of use, held together in one corner with duct tape. She opened it with a gentleness that belied her usual brisk movements, lifting out an acoustic guitar that had clearly been well loved. "It was Noah's," she said by way of explanation, running her fingers lightly over the worn finish. "One of the few things I managed to keep." Lily settled onto a chair, positioning the guitar on her lap with practiced ease. After a moment of tuning, she began to play. A simple melody at first, her fingers finding their way along the strings with growing confidence. Then, to Ethan's surprise, she began to sing. Her voice was untrained but clear, carrying a raw, emotional honesty that no amount of professional polish could replicate. The song was about finding light in darkness, about carrying on when the path forward seemed impossible to see. As she sang, Ethan noticed others in the center growing quiet, turning to listen. Grace leaned against a nearby wall, a soft smile on her face as she watched Lily, perhaps seeing a side of the guarded girl that rarely emerged. When the last note faded, there was a moment of appreciative silence before gentle applause rippled through the space. Lily ducked her head, clearly uncomfortable with the attention, but Ethan could see a flush of pleasure on her cheeks. "That was beautiful," he said quietly as the center's normal activity resumed around them. "Noah wrote it," she replied, carefully returning the guitar to its case. "After he got sick, but before the neural interface. He said music was the one thing that made the noise in his head quiet down." The mention of neural interfaces brought them back to the reality of their situation, the coming confrontation with Richard Williams, the uncertain future of the Nexus project, the lives that hung in the balance. "What will you do?" Lily asked, her voice low. "If your father refuses to listen? If he denies everything?" It was the question Ethan had been avoiding. In the sheltered world he had grown up in, direct confrontation was considered vulgar. Problems were managed discreetly, disagreements handled through intermediaries, conflicts resolved through careful negotiation rather than emotional appeals. I don't know, he admitted. I've never stood up to him before. Not really. Maybe it's time, Lily suggested, her expression serious. Sometimes people need someone they care about to be the one who says enough, someone whose opinion actually matters to them. I'm not sure my opinion does matter to him, Ethan said, the old insecurity surfacing despite his best efforts. The company has always come first. Lily's response was interrupted by Grace approaching their corner, her expression grave as she held out her phone to Ethan. Detective Cooper just called, she said. There's been a development. She wants to meet us, all of us, tonight. Ethan took the phone, apprehension tightening his chest. What kind of development? She wouldn't say over the phone, Grace replied, but she mentioned two names I think you'll recognize, Marcus Daniels and Victor Reynolds. Detective Sarah Cooper waited for them at an all-night diner 6 blocks from the community center. Despite the late hour, the place was half full. Shift workers grabbing coffee, taxi drivers on break, the occasional night owl hunched over a laptop. It was the perfect meeting place, public enough to be safe, anonymous enough for privacy. Cooper sat in a corner booth, a file folder on the table in front of her, and 2 coffee cups already empty. She looked up as they entered, her sharp eyes taking in Ethan, Lily, and Grace with a quick assessment. Thank you for coming, she said, gesturing for them to sit. I've ordered coffee for everyone. Hope that's okay. As they slid into the booth, Ethan noticed the tension in Cooper's posture, the carefully controlled alertness of someone who had discovered something significant and potentially dangerous. What happened? He asked, not bothering with pleasantries. Cooper glanced around the diner, then opened the folder and slid a document across the table. Marcus Daniels and Victor Reynolds contacted me directly after my conversation with you. They want to meet with all of us, including your father. Ethan stared at the printed email, reading the carefully worded message from the 2 former Horizon executives. They say they have evidence about Nexus, documentation that proves my father knew about the safety risks. Yes, Cooper confirmed. And they're willing to turn it all over, on one condition. What condition? Lily asked, leaning forward. That Richard Williams voluntarily withdraws Nexus from consideration for FDA approval and issues a public statement acknowledging the technology's flaws. Cooper took a sip of her fresh coffee, her expression thoughtful. No criminal charges, no public humiliation beyond what's necessary to protect public safety, just accountability. My father would never agree to that, Ethan said automatically. It would cost the company millions, billions maybe. Perhaps, Cooper acknowledged, but the alternative might be worse. If this evidence becomes public through other channels, the financial and legal consequences could be devastating, not to mention the reputational damage. The waitress arrived with their coffee, creating a momentary pause in the conversation. When she left, Grace leaned forward, her expression serious. What exactly are they claiming the Nexus technology does? She asked. What's the danger? Cooper hesitated, choosing her words carefully. According to Daniels and Reynolds, the Nexus neural interface has shown a pattern of malfunction in stress testing, sending incorrect signals to the brain that could potentially trigger seizures, cognitive disruption, even permanent neurological damage in some cases. Lily's sharp intake of breath was audible in the quiet booth. Just like Noah, she whispered. Your brother? Cooper asked, her attention shifting to Lily. He was part of a similar trial with a different company, Grace explained, when Lily remained silent. The device malfunctioned. He suffered severe complications. Understanding dawned in Cooper's eyes, the final piece of a puzzle falling into place. That's why you helped Ethan, she said to Lily. It wasn't random at all. I couldn't let it happen again, Lily said simply, not if I could help stop it. Ethan reached out, covering Lily's hand with his own in a gesture of support that felt both natural and momentous. She didn't pull away. So what now? He asked Cooper. You want us to meet with these men, with my father? Cooper nodded. Tomorrow morning. Neutral ground. My office at the precinct. I've already spoken to your father. He's agreed to come. Just like that? Ethan couldn't hide his skepticism. He agreed to meet with the men he claims are threatening his family? A flicker of something, approval perhaps, crossed Cooper's face at Ethan's astute question. That's what made me think there might be truth to Daniels and Reynolds' claims. Your father didn't hesitate, almost seemed relieved. The implications of that observation hung in the air between them. If Richard Williams was relieved at the prospect of facing his accusers, it suggested a man ready to unburden himself of a heavy secret. "I'll be there," Ethan said decisively. "We all will." He looked at Lily and Grace, seeking confirmation. Grace nodded immediately. "Of course." Lily hesitated, her expression conflicted. "I'm not sure I should be involved in this. It's your family, your father's company." "You are involved," Ethan insisted, surprising himself with the intensity of his conviction. "You've been involved since the moment you climbed up to my window. Besides," he added, his voice softening, "I need you there." The simple admission seemed to reach something in Lily that more elaborate persuasion couldn't have touched. She nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll come." As they finalized the details with Cooper, Ethan felt a strange mix of dread and anticipation building inside him. Tomorrow would bring a confrontation he had never imagined having with his father, a reckoning not just for Richard Williams, the businessman, but for Richard Williams, the father, a man whose choices and priorities were about to be laid bare, not in a boardroom or a courtroom, but in the more intimate and perhaps more daunting arena of his son's judgment. The Seattle night pressed against the diner windows, the city lights reflecting on the rain-slicked streets outside. Tomorrow those same streets would lead Ethan back to his father, but he would walk them as someone fundamentally changed, no longer the passive, lonely boy from the mansion on the hill, but someone who had glimpsed a different way of living, of connecting, of standing up for what mattered, and he wouldn't be walking alone. Morning arrived with Seattle's characteristic gray light, filtering through the community center's high windows. Ethan woke early, his sleep having been fitful at best. The enormity of the coming confrontation weighed heavily on him. In a few hours he would face his father across a table, not as the dutiful son who had always accepted Richard Williams's authority without question, but as someone demanding accountability. He found Lily already awake, sitting at one of the center's worn tables with a cup of coffee clutched between her hands. She had changed into what Ethan guessed were her best clothes: clean jeans without tears, a simple black t-shirt, and a denim jacket that was slightly too large for her frame. Her dark hair was pulled back neatly, and there was a tension in her posture that spoke of her own apprehension about the meeting ahead. "Couldn't sleep either?" Ethan asked, sliding into the seat across from her. Lily shook her head, offering a tight smile. "Too many thoughts. About Noah, about what your father might say, about what happens after all this." The last part hung in the air between them, a question neither had voiced aloud. What would happen after this confrontation? Would Ethan simply return to his life of privilege? Would Lily disappear back into the margins of Seattle, their brief but intense connection fading like a vivid dream upon waking? "Whatever happens," Ethan said carefully, "I'm not going back to the way things were before. I can't." Something flickered across Lily's face, a mixture of hope and skepticism that mirrored his own complicated feelings. Before she could respond, Grace joined them, her practical presence a steadying influence. "Detective Cooper sent a car," she announced, glancing at her watch. "It'll be here in 15 minutes. Are you both ready for this?" "No," they answered in unison, then exchanged surprised glances that melted into nervous laughter. Grace smiled, the expression softening the worry lines around her eyes. "Good. Being aware of how unprepared you are is the best preparation sometimes." She sat down, regarding them both with a maternal seriousness. "Listen to me. What happens today matters, not just for Nexus or Horizon or your father, Ethan. It matters for both of you. The way we face difficult truths shapes who we become." The weight of her words settled over them as they finished their coffee in thoughtful silence. When the police car arrived, they walked out together into the damp Seattle morning, the Space Needle rising through the mist like a sentinel watching over the city. The precinct was a hive of controlled activity when they arrived. Detective Cooper met them in the lobby, her professional demeanor slightly softened by what might have been respect as she greeted them. "They're all here," she informed them, leading the way through the building. "Your father arrived 20 minutes ago. Daniels and Reynolds came separately just after him." "Are they talking to each other?" Ethan asked, trying to imagine his father in the same room as the men he had labeled threats. "Not yet," Cooper replied. "I've kept them in separate rooms until everyone was here. This isn't an official police matter, more of a mediated conversation." She stopped outside a conference room door, turning to face them directly. "I should warn you, this won't be easy. There are strong feelings on all sides. My job is to keep things civil and focused on facts, not accusations. Are you ready?" Ethan nodded, feeling Lily's presence beside him like a source of strength. Grace placed a supportive hand on both their shoulders, a silent reminder that they weren't facing this alone. Cooper opened the door. The conference room was standard police issue, functional rather than comfortable, with a long table surrounded by chairs, fluorescent lighting overhead, and walls painted an institutional beige. 3 men were already seated at the table, as far from each other as the space allowed. Richard Williams sat at one end, his posture impeccable as always, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than most police officers made in a month. But something was different, a certain guardedness in his expression, an unfamiliar uncertainty in his eyes as they fixed on Ethan. At the other end sat Marcus Daniels and Victor Reynolds. Daniels was a compact man, with intense eyes and restless energy that manifested in the constant movement of his fingers against the table's surface. Reynolds presented a sharp contrast, tall, composed, with the careful neutrality of expression that came from years of legal training. As Ethan entered, all 3 men stood, the moment stretched, heavy with unspoken emotion. "Ethan," Richard said, his voice carrying a warmth that his son rarely heard. "Thank God you're all right." Before Ethan could respond, his father moved around the table and, in a gesture so unexpected it momentarily stunned everyone in the room, pulled him into a tight embrace. The unfamiliarity of his father's arms around him left Ethan frozen for a second before he hesitantly returned the hug. "I'm okay, Dad," he said quietly, feeling the slight tremor in his father's usually steady frame. When they separated, Richard's eyes moved to Lily, who stood slightly behind Ethan, her posture defensive. "You must be the girl who helped my son," he said, his voice careful but sincere. "I owe you a debt I can never repay." Lily's surprise was evident in the slight widening of her eyes, but she nodded acknowledgement, maintaining her guarded stance. Detective Cooper cleared her throat gently. "Why don't we all sit down? We have a lot to discuss." As they took their places around the table, Ethan between Lily and Grace directly across from his father, Cooper remained standing, establishing her role as mediator. "Let me be clear about the purpose of this meeting," she began. "We're here to address specific allegations about the Nexus neural interface technology developed by Horizon Innovations. Mr. Daniels and Mr. Reynolds have claimed they possess evidence that the technology has demonstrated dangerous flaws during testing, flaws that were documented but not addressed before moving toward FDA approval." She turned to Richard. "Mr. Williams has agreed to hear these concerns directly, without legal representation present. This is not a formal deposition or hearing. No recordings are being made. The goal is to find a resolution that prioritizes public safety while respecting the legitimate interests of all parties." Cooper looked at each person in turn, her expression firm. "I expect everyone to speak honestly and listen respectfully. Are we clear?" Nods around the table confirmed agreement, though tension remained palpable in the air. "Mr. Daniels, Mr. Reynolds," Cooper continued, "since you initiated this meeting, perhaps you should begin by presenting your concerns and evidence." Marcus Daniels leaned forward, his gaze fixed on Richard. 3 years ago, I led the engineering team that developed the first prototype of the Nexus neural interface. It was groundbreaking technology, a device that could potentially treat everything from epilepsy to Parkinson's by regulating abnormal brain activity. His voice carried the passion of someone who had once believed deeply in his work. The early results were promising, and Horizon fast-tracked development. That's when problems began to emerge. He nodded to Reynolds, who opened a folder and slid several documents across the table. "During expanded stress testing," Reynolds continued in the measured tones of a lawyer accustomed to presenting evidence, "we discovered that under certain conditions, specifically when the user experienced elevated stress levels or when the device was exposed to specific electromagnetic frequencies, the Nexus interface produced erratic signals. In 23% of test cases, these signals triggered adverse neurological responses." "Adverse neurological responses," Lily repeated, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "You mean seizures, cognitive disruption, brain damage?" Reynolds met her gaze directly. "Yes. In layman's terms, that's exactly what I mean." All eyes turned to Richard, whose expression remained carefully neutral as he examined the documents before him. "We brought these findings to Mr. Williams personally in February of last year," Daniels continued. "We recommended halting development until the stability issues could be addressed. That would have meant delays of at least 18 months and additional R&D costs of approximately $50 million. And significant market advantage lost to competitors, Reynolds added. Potentially billions in revenue and stock value. Richard looked up from the documents, his face unreadable. You're claiming I knowingly proceeded with a dangerous technology for profit. We're stating facts, Reynolds replied evenly. 3 weeks after our presentation of these findings, both Marcus and I were removed from the Nexus project. Within 2 months, we were both out of the company entirely, with generous severance packages and ironclad NDAs that we're violating by being here today. And the Nexus development continued, Daniels added, under new leadership that conveniently failed to find the same issues in their testing protocols. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to Richard Williams. The tech mogul sat perfectly still, his gaze moving from the documents to his son's face, then to Lily, and finally back to his former employees. You're right, he said simply. The admission hung in the air, stunning in its directness. I received your reports. I reviewed the data. And I made the decision to continue development while authorizing a parallel effort to address the stability issues. Richard's voice remained steady, though something in his eyes had changed. A weariness, perhaps, or the relief of finally speaking a truth long suppressed. The pressure from the board, from investors, from competitors breathing down our necks, I convinced myself we could fix the problems before launch, that the risk was manageable. He turned to face Ethan directly, something like pleading in his expression. You have to understand. Horizon is more than just a company to me. It's my life's work. Everything I've built, everything I've sacrificed for... Sacrificed? Ethan interrupted, the word catching in his throat. What exactly have you sacrificed, Dad? Your time, your relationships, me? The raw emotion in his voice seemed to strike Richard physically. He flinched, then straightened, facing his son with new resolve. Yes, he admitted quietly. All of that. I told myself it was for your future, for your security. But somewhere along the way I lost sight of what really mattered. Did you know, Lily asked suddenly, her voice surprisingly calm, what neural interfaces like Nexus can do when they malfunction? The real human cost? Richard turned to her, his expression grave. I understood the theoretical risks, yes. My brother wasn't theoretical, Lily said, each word precise and cutting. He was 16 when a neural interface similar to Nexus malfunctioned during his treatment for epilepsy. He spent months in the hospital. He'll need specialized care for the rest of his life, all because some company decided their timeline was more important than thorough safety testing. The silence that followed her statement was profound. Richard Williams, the corporate titan, the tech visionary, the man whose decisions affected thousands, seemed to physically diminish under the weight of her words. I'm sorry, he said finally, truly sorry, for your brother, for what your family endured, and for what other families might have endured if Nexus had gone to market as planned. As planned? Cooper picked up on the phrasing immediately. Has something changed, Mr. Williams? Richard nodded, reaching into his briefcase to withdraw a document of his own. Yesterday, after Detective Cooper contacted me about this meeting, I made a decision. I called an emergency session of Horizon's board of directors. He slid the paper across the table. This is my formal recommendation to withdraw Nexus from FDA consideration pending a complete redesign and independent safety verification. The board voted to approve it this morning. Daniels and Reynolds exchanged surprised glances, clearly caught off guard by this development. You're actually halting the project? Daniels asked, disbelief evident in his tone. Completely, Richard confirmed, and I've authorized full disclosure of the safety issues to the FDA and to our shareholders. The company will take a significant financial hit, but he looked at Ethan, something vulnerable in his expression. Some things are more important than profit margins. Why now? Reynolds pressed, professional skepticism in his voice. You've had our data for over a year. What changed? Richard's gaze moved from Ethan to Lily, then back to his former employees. I had to face what I'd become, he said simply, what I was willing to risk. It took my son disappearing, and this young woman risking her safety to protect him, to make me see clearly. The admission hung in the air, raw and honest in a way that corporate statements and legal documents could never be. For perhaps the first time in his professional life, Richard Williams had stepped out from behind the carefully constructed facade of the successful CEO to speak as simply a man, flawed, human, and finally facing the consequences of his choices. Detective Cooper let the moment settle before speaking again. Mr. Daniels, Mr. Reynolds, does this address your concerns? The withdrawal of Nexus from consideration and public disclosure of the safety issues. The two men conferred briefly in low voices before Reynolds responded. It's a start. We would want to review the exact language of the disclosures and be assured that no modified version of the current Nexus technology proceeds without addressing the fundamental stability issues we identified. That's reasonable, Richard agreed with a nod. I'm prepared to establish an independent review board with both of you as consulting members if you're willing. Full transparency, full access to all development data going forward. As the details of this arrangement began to take shape, with Cooper mediating the discussion, Ethan found himself watching his father with new eyes. The man across the table was both familiar and strange, the powerful businessman he had always known, yet somehow more human, more vulnerable than Ethan had ever seen him. When the formal part of the meeting concluded, with agreements sketched out and next steps established, Cooper suggested giving the Williams family some privacy to talk. As Daniels and Reynolds gathered their materials, Richard approached them with an extended hand. I owe you both an apology, he said, the words clearly unfamiliar on his tongue. You were doing your jobs, protecting the company, protecting potential patients. I should have listened. After a moment's hesitation, Daniels accepted the handshake. It took courage to stop the project, he acknowledged, more than most CEOs would have shown. As the others filed out, leaving Ethan alone with his father, Richard Williams seemed to age before his son's eyes, the weight of his decisions, his regrets, his lost years, settling visibly on his shoulders. Ethan, he began, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain, I don't know where to start. How about the truth? Ethan suggested quietly. Not the corporate version, just the truth. Richard nodded, sinking back into his chair as if the question itself had physical weight. The truth is, I lost my way. Somewhere between founding Horizon and building it into what it is today, I convinced myself that success was measured in market share and stock prices. He looked directly at his son, abandoning the careful control he had maintained throughout his corporate life. I told myself I was securing your future, but really I was hiding in my work, because it was easier than facing how badly I was failing as a father. The raw honesty of the admission struck Ethan speechless. His father, the man who had always seemed so certain, so untouchable, was looking at him with something like pleading in his eyes. When Cooper called to say you were missing, that someone might have taken you, Richard's voice faltered. It was like the ground disappeared beneath me. Nothing else mattered. Not Horizon, not Nexus, not any of it. Just finding you safe. He reached across the table, hesitantly placing his hand over Ethan's. I can't undo the years I wasted. But if you'll let me, I'd like to try to be the father you deserve going forward. Ethan looked at his father's hand covering his own, the same hands that had built a tech empire, signed billion-dollar deals, changed the landscape of Seattle itself. Yet, in this moment, they seemed simply the hands of a man reaching out to his son, asking for a second chance. It won't be easy, Ethan said finally. We barely know each other. Then we'll start there, Richard replied, hope cautiously entering his voice. Getting to know each other. No expectations, no pressure, just time together. Ethan nodded slowly, a lifetime of longing for his father's attention warring with years of learned caution. I'd like that, he said simply. As they left the conference room together, they found Lily and Grace waiting in the hallway, deep in conversation with Detective Cooper. Lily looked up as they approached, her expression carefully neutral as she assessed the outcome of their private discussion. Lily, Richard said, stopping before her, I meant what I said earlier. I owe you a debt I can never fully repay. You saved my son, not just from those men, but from the isolation I created. Thank you. Lily shifted uncomfortably under his direct gratitude. I just did what needed doing, she said with a shrug that didn't quite hide her emotion. Nevertheless, Richard continued, if there's anything I can do for you, anything at all, please don't hesitate to ask. A flicker of something, determination perhaps, crossed Lily's face. Actually, she said, straightening her shoulders, there is something. Richard nodded encouragingly. Name it. The community center where Ethan and I stayed, Lily said, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. It helps a lot of people, kids like me who don't have anywhere else to go, but they're always struggling for funding, for space. Understanding dawned in Richard's eyes. Consider it done. Whatever they need, renovation, expansion, ongoing support. Grace, he turned to the older woman, I'd like to meet with you soon to discuss how Horizon can partner with your organization properly, not just a one-time donation, but sustainable support. Grace's expression was cautiously optimistic. That would make an enormous difference for a lot of vulnerable people, Mr. Williams. Richard, please, he insisted, and it's the least I can do. He glanced at his son, something like pride in his eyes. It seems my son found wisdom in places I never thought to look. As they made arrangements to meet again, Ethan felt something shift inside him, a new certainty taking root where doubt and loneliness had lived for so long. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. His relationship with his father would take time to rebuild, trust that would need to be earned through actions, not just words. But for the first time in years, he felt hope, not just for himself, but for his father, for Lily, for the community that had sheltered them when they needed it most. Something new was beginning, forged in the crucible of truth finally spoken aloud. 6 months later, Seattle's early spring sunshine broke through the clouds, casting warm light across the courtyard of what had once been an abandoned warehouse in Pioneer Square. Now the renovated building stood as a testament to transformation, its brick facade restored, windows gleaming, and a new sign above the entrance, the Bridge Community Center. Inside, the space was barely recognizable from the makeshift shelter Ethan had first encountered on that rainy night half a year ago. While maintaining its welcoming atmosphere, the center now boasted proper facilities, a modern kitchen, comfortable dormitories with privacy partitions, classrooms equipped with computers, a medical clinic staffed part-time by volunteer healthcare workers, and a music room filled with donated instruments. Ethan stood in the center of the main common area, surveying the bustling activity around him, with a sense of quiet pride. Volunteers arranged chairs in concentric circles, hung colorful banners, and set up a refreshment table for the center's official grand reopening celebration later that afternoon. Hard to believe this is the same place, isn't it? Grace said, joining him with a clipboard in hand. The past months had softened the worry lines around her eyes, though her practical nature remained unchanged. From leaky roof to state-of-the-art facilities in less than 6 months. Your father doesn't waste time once he commits to something. It's one of his better qualities, Ethan agreed with a smile. Once he decides on a course of action, nothing stops him. Richard Williams had been true to his word that day in the police station. Within a week of their confrontation, he had established a foundation to support the community center, providing not just funding, but his business expertise and connections to transform Grace's vision into reality. The Horizon Foundation now served as a model for corporate social responsibility, with the Bridge as its flagship project. Have you seen Lily? Ethan asked, trying to sound casual despite the way his heart still accelerated at the mention of her name. Grace's knowing smile suggested his attempt at nonchalance had failed. Music room. Where else would she be on a day like this? Ethan nodded his thanks and made his way through the building, exchanging greetings with volunteers and residents he had come to know well over the months. His life had changed in ways he could never have imagined. That night, Lily appeared at his window. No longer the isolated boy in the mansion on the hill, he now divided his time between school, working with his father to learn the business side of Horizon, and volunteering at the Bridge. The music room door was partially open, soft guitar notes drifting into the hallway. Ethan paused, listening as Lily's voice joined the melody. Stronger now, more confident after months of practice. The song was one she had written herself, about finding home in unexpected places, about bridges between worlds that seemed impossibly far apart. He waited until she finished before knocking gently on the doorframe. Lily looked up, her face breaking into a smile that still made his breath catch. "Hey, rich boy," she greeted him, the once derisive nickname now an affectionate teasing between them. "Come to check on the preparations." "Among other things," he replied, entering the room and taking a seat beside her on the small performance platform. "That song sounds amazing. Are you ready to play it for everyone today?" Lily carefully placed her guitar, Noah's guitar in its case. "As ready as I'll ever be. It helps knowing you'll be in the audience." She looked around the music room with its acoustic panels, proper lighting, and row of instruments available for anyone who wanted to learn. "Sometimes, I still can't believe all of this is real." The changes in Lily over the past 6 months had been as remarkable as the transformation of the center itself. With Grace's help, She had enrolled in a GED program, which she was on track to complete by summer. The stability of having a permanent place at the bridge had allowed her to visit Noah more regularly, bringing her guitar to play for him during each visit. And perhaps most significantly, she had started therapy to process the trauma of her family's collapse. "How was your visit with Noah yesterday?" Ethan asked gently. A soft smile touched Lily's lips. "Good, really good, actually. The new treatment program seems to be helping. He recognized me right away this time, and we played music together for almost an hour." The specialized care facility where Noah lived had been another beneficiary of the Horizon Foundation's support, with Richard personally ensuring that Noah and other patients received access to the best available treatments. "And your mum?" Ethan asked, knowing this was still a tender subject. Lily's expression grew more guarded but not closed off. 3 months sober now, she's trying. The counselor says it's important to maintain boundaries, so we're taking it slow. Weekly phone calls, supervised visits twice a month. She shrugged, a gesture that carried less defensive nonchalance than it once had. "One day at a time, right?" Ethan nodded, reaching out to take her hand, a gesture that had become natural between them. Their relationship had evolved gradually, built on the foundation of trust forged during those intense first days. They were not officially dating, both agreeing they needed time to work on themselves first, but the connection between them was undeniable, growing stronger with each passing day. "Dad's bringing the final paperwork for the foundation endowment today," Ethan said, changing the subject to lighter ground. "Once it's signed, the bridge will be financially secure for at least 20 years, no matter what happens with Horizon." "How is he doing with the Nexus situation?" Lily asked. Richard Williams had faced significant professional consequences for his decision to withdraw the Nexus technology and disclose its flaws. Horizon's stock had initially plummeted, the board had considered ousting him as CEO, and competitors had seized the opportunity to advance their own neural interface projects. But Richard had stood firm, weathering the corporate storm with a newfound commitment to ethical leadership. "Better than expected," Ethan replied. "The new Nexus team, including Daniels and Reynolds, is making real progress on a redesigned interface that addresses the stability issues. It's still years from market, but early testing is promising." He smiled slightly. "And surprisingly, Horizon's transparency about the problems actually improved our reputation in the long run. Dad says consumer trust is worth more than short-term profits." "Words I never thought Richard Williams would utter," came a familiar voice from the doorway. They looked up to see Detective Sarah Cooper, dressed in civilian clothes rather than her usual professional attire. Though the case that had brought her into their lives was long closed, Cooper had remained connected to the bridge, volunteering her time to teach self-defense classes and helping residents navigate legal issues. "Detective," Ethan greeted her warmly, "I didn't know you were coming today." "Wouldn't miss it," she replied, leaning against the doorframe. "Besides, Grace mentioned something about needing security for the event, and apparently being a cop means I'm perpetually on call for crowd control." Her dry humor masked what they all knew, that Cooper had found something at the bridge that had been missing in her life as well, a community that valued her for more than just her badge. "Is everything ready for the ceremony?" Lily asked, standing and carefully slinging her guitar case over her shoulder. "Almost," Cooper replied. "Your father just arrived," she added to Ethan. "He's with Grace in the main hall, looking surprisingly comfortable for a billionaire surrounded by social workers and former street kids." Ethan smiled at the image. Richard Williams had undergone perhaps the most remarkable transformation of all. While still the brilliant, driven businessman who had built Horizon Innovations, he had discovered a capacity for compassion and connection that had been buried beneath years of single-minded ambition. His relationship with Ethan had evolved too. Weekly dinners that were actually kept, genuine interest in his son's thoughts and dreams, and a willingness to be vulnerable that had once seemed impossible. "We should head over," Ethan said, standing and offering his hand to Lily. Big moment. As they walked together through the corridors of the bridge, Ethan marveled at how differently he moved through the world now. 6 months ago, he had been adrift in his own life, isolated by privilege and his father's emotional absence. Now he walked with purpose, with connection, with a sense of belonging that no amount of wealth could have provided. The main hall was filled nearly to capacity when they arrived. Community members, volunteers, supporters, and local officials mingled together, the usual social barriers dissolved in the shared purpose of celebrating the bridge's official opening. Richard stood near the center of the room, deep in conversation with Grace and the mayor of Seattle, looking engaged and present in a way that still sometimes surprised Ethan. When Richard spotted them, he excused himself and crossed the room to greet them. "There you are," he said warmly. "Everything ready for your performance, Lily?" "As ready as it'll ever be," she replied, the lingering awkwardness between them having mellowed into a cautious mutual respect over the months. "You'll be wonderful," Richard assured her with genuine confidence. "Ethan, the mayor was just asking about your involvement with the youth mentorship program. Would you mind speaking with her for a moment?" As Ethan moved away to join the conversation, Richard turned back to Lily, his expression growing more serious. "I wanted to tell you something before the ceremony," he said, lowering his voice slightly. "I visited Noah yesterday." Surprise flashed across Lily's face. "You did? Why?" "To see for myself how he's doing and to deliver some news personally." Richard's professional demeanor softened. "The new treatment protocol is showing significant promise, not just for Noah, but for others with similar neurological conditions. The research team believes that with continued therapy and the right support, he might eventually be able to live semi-independently, perhaps even here at the bridge, if that's something you both would want." Lily stared at him, momentarily speechless, hope and caution warring in her expression. "Are you serious? They think he could live outside the facility?" "Not immediately," Richard cautioned gently. "It would be a gradual transition with plenty of support. But yes, in time it's a real possibility." The emotions that crossed Lily's face were too complex to name. Joy, hope, gratitude, and the lingering wariness of someone who had learned the hard way that good news often came with hidden costs. "Why are you doing this?" she asked finally. "All of this? The bridge, Noah's care, everything. Is it just guilt? Or trying to make Ethan happy?" Richard considered her question with the seriousness it deserved. "It started that way, perhaps," he admitted. "Guilt over what Nexus might have done. Gratitude for what you did for my son. But it's become something more." He glanced around the bustling community center. "This place, these people, they've shown me what really matters in ways my years in corporate boardrooms never could. I'm not just doing this for Ethan or for you, or even to atone for past mistakes. I'm doing it because it's right, because it's the man I want to be going forward." The simple honesty of his answer seemed to reach Lily in a way his wealth and influence never had. She nodded slowly, a new understanding passing between them. "Thank you," she said simply, "for Noah, for everything." The moment was interrupted as Grace called for everyone's attention, announcing that the ceremony was about to begin. Ethan rejoined them, his eyes questioning as he noted the emotional undercurrent between his father and Lily. "Everything okay?" he asked quietly. Lily nodded, a genuine smile breaking through. "Better than okay," she assured him, squeezing his hand before moving toward the small stage area where her guitar had been set up. The ceremony itself was simple, but meaningful. Grace spoke about the bridge's mission, not just to provide shelter, but to create connections between different parts of Seattle's community, to build pathways from hardship to opportunity. The mayor praised the innovative public-private partnership that had made the center possible. Richard spoke briefly about the Horizon Foundation's commitment to social responsibility, his words carrying the weight of personal conviction rather than corporate platitudes. Then it was Lily's turn. She stepped onto the small stage, adjusting the microphone with a nervousness that only Ethan could recognize in her otherwise composed demeanor. She had performed at the center many times over the past months, but never before such a large audience, never with so much of herself invested in the moment. "This song is called Invisible Bridge," she said simply. "It's for everyone who's ever felt unseen, and for those who took the time to really look." Her fingers found the opening chords, and her voice, clear and strong, filled the room. The song told the story of two worlds separated by more than distance, of walls both visible and invisible, of the courage it takes to cross boundaries and the healing that comes from connection. Though she never mentioned names, everyone who knew their story recognized the truth at its heart. A girl who climbed a mansion wall to save a boy she didn't know, and in doing so, began a chain of healing that extended far beyond either of them. As the final notes faded, there was a moment of profound silence before applause erupted. Ethan caught Lily's eye across the room, seeing in her expression the same wonder he felt, that something so beautiful could emerge from such unlikely beginnings. The formal ceremony transitioned into celebration, with food and conversation flowing freely. Ethan moved through the crowd, watching as worlds continued to merge. His father deep in conversation with a former street artist about urban renewal programs, Detective Cooper laughing with the center's youngest residents, Grace introducing community members to potential employers with genuine enthusiasm for each person's skills and dreams. He found Lily near the refreshment table, accepting congratulations for her performance with a mix of pride and self-consciousness that he found endearing. "That was amazing," he said, when he finally reached her side. "You're amazing." A blush colored her cheeks, but she didn't deflect the compliment as she once might have. "Thanks, it felt right, you know. Like everything that happened led to this moment." Ethan nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "Want to get some air?" They slipped away from the celebration, finding a quiet spot in the courtyard. The Seattle skyline rose before them, the same view they had shared from the community center's roof on that first night, but somehow different now. No longer a distant, unreachable world, but a shared landscape of possibility. "So," Ethan said after a comfortable silence, "what happens next?" Lily considered the question, her expression thoughtful. "I finish my GED this summer. Maybe look at community college courses for the fall. Keep visiting Noah, keep working with the music program here." She glanced at him sideways. "What about you? Still planning on Horizon University?" It was a gentle tease about his father's alma mater, which had always been assumed to be Ethan's path as well. "Actually," Ethan replied, "I've been thinking about taking a gap year. Working full-time at the Bridge, learning more about non-profit management, maybe helping to set up similar centers in other neighborhoods." He hesitated, then added, "Dad's surprisingly supportive of the idea. Says there's more to education than classrooms, and more to business than profit margins." "Richard Williams, social justice warrior," Lily said with a laugh. "Who would have thought? People can change," Ethan said softly. "We both have." Lily nodded, her expression growing more serious. "I'm not the same person who climbed up to your window that night, and you're definitely not the same lonely rich kid I found there. For the better, I hope. Definitely for the better." She turned to face him directly, vulnerability and strength balanced in her gaze. "Whatever happens next, Ethan, I'm glad you're part of my story now, that we built this bridge together." The simple honesty of her words touched something deep within him. Without overthinking, Ethan leaned forward and kissed her gently, their first kiss sweet with the promise of all that might come after. When they parted, Lily's smile held a new warmth. "We should get back to the party," she said, though she made no move to leave. "Grace will be looking for us." "In a minute," Ethan replied, taking her hand in his. "I just want to remember this moment. Everything that led us here, and everything that's still to come." They stood together in the courtyard of what had once been a forgotten warehouse, and was now a place of hope and connection, their silhouettes outlined against the Seattle skyline. Above them, the clouds that had dominated the morning had given way to clear blue sky, a canvas of possibility stretching endlessly before them. Inside the building that had become a bridge between worlds, the celebration continued, a testament to what can happen when barriers fall and people truly see one another. Richard Williams, once defined solely by his corporate success, now moved through the crowd with a different kind of purpose, his transformation from distant CEO to engaged community member, perhaps the most unexpected bridge of all. Grace watched it all with quiet satisfaction, her years of perseverance vindicated in the vibrant community that had blossomed around her vision. Detective Cooper, finding purpose beyond her badge, taught a group of teenagers that strength comes in many forms. And throughout the center, people who had once been invisible to each other, separated by wealth, by circumstance, by the artificial boundaries of urban life, found common ground and shared humanity. As Ethan and Lily returned to the celebration hand in hand, they carried with them the knowledge that some journeys begin in the most unlikely places, a mansion window on a rainy night, a darkened alley, a community center filled with strangers who become family, that sometimes saving someone else becomes the path to saving yourself, and that the bridges we build between our separate worlds might be invisible to the casual observer, but they are the strongest structures we can create. The story of a girl who saw men threatening a wealthy boy's home and chose to intervene had become something larger, a story of connection across difference, of courage in the face of fear, of the family we create when the one we're born into fails us, a story not of walls and separation, but of bridges and the brave souls who dare to cross them.